Energy systems are probably the top 10 worst additions made in video game history. Worst case scenario, which is too many cases, energy systems are implemented horribly and are clearly just a way for the developers to earn more money than they would from making their game a one-time purchase. Case in point, Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice, both recent free-to-play mobile games by the same company, Nordcurrent. I love these games, and I actively look forward to knowing where the plots go and actually really care about many of the characters. I might be one in 40 people who do. This is because of both games' biggest flaw, the energy system. Here's the best way I can describe both games to you. Imagine an Agatha Christie murder mystery as a video game where a lot of the gameplay is talking to the characters, going to different locations, and frequently doing hidden object scenes and puzzle minigames along the way. What makes these games special to me is the specific stories told and some of their featured characters. Here's where the energy system ruins the whole experience. When you consume any form of media, you usually expect to be able to do so without being interrupted by the media itself. The whole point and the joy that comes from reading a novel or watching a TV show or movie or even playing a video game is that you get to do it at your own time, at your own pace, and at your own leisure. The energy system of Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice completely tarnishes all of that by constantly interrupting your time playing them through running out of energy pretty fast every day. Let's assume you're playing these games without paying for energy at all. You're limited by a daily 200 energy to progress the story. So many actions you do in game will cost you that energy. For example, every time you pick up a single item in a hidden object scene, every time you zoom in on an area, every time you get an item and use an item in game, every time you trigger a cutscene, every time you play a puzzle, and every time you make a choice during dialogue, all of that costs energy. This leaves you with only like 5 to 10 minutes of gameplay because how frequent all of that is before having to wait the next day for the energy to be refueled. To put this in perspective, each chapter of Murder in the Alps, uninterrupted, is somewhere around 2 to 3 hours, with one chapter being at least 5 hours. With only 5 to 10 minutes of daily gameplay under the energy system, it would take more than 2 weeks at best, and at worst around a month to be a whole chapter. Being forced to spend that much time to complete a part of the game that otherwise takes less than a day to do is completely immersion breaking and would be called disgraceful. This has happened to any other media. Now, let's take Murder by Choice, which currently only has one massive chapter of a runtime of 16 to 17 hours, and don't worry, I will get to that. I started playing the game soon after it came out on October 30, 2022, and played it pretty much every day since without spending any money and only watched like 10 ads. It took me until March 10 next year to finally beat the whole chapter. It took me more than 4 whole months, more than a third of a whole year, in order to complete this one story of a video game that otherwise would have taken me less than a week to do if it wasn't for the energy system. This is, in the nicest terms, unacceptable. It's very obvious with the energy system that Nordcurrent wants to maximize the revenue they can get from these games without any regard to the amount of potential fans they turn off by constantly interrupting them from playing the games they downloaded. I wouldn't be surprised at all if hundreds of thousands of people saw these games, downloaded it, liked the first hour because of the initial energy given, realized how little energy they actually have left every day, realize that they have to pay quite a bit in order to continue with less interruptions, and then just uninstall the game for being bored or frustrated. That is the saddest thing to me. There will always be players who pay no matter what, meaning Nordcurrent never has any financial incentive to improve, let alone remove the energy system from their games. But as a result, you won't find many dedicated fans online about these games, and I really don't want to use Facebook to reach other players. In an alternate universe, I can honestly see Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice having a powerhouse fandom on the likes of something like, I don't know, Genshin Impact, because there's just no stupid energy system. Unfortunately, I don't live in that world. There's not even an option to pay once to permanently bypass the energy system. You always have to make sure you have enough in stock before playing. To really drive home the point, in Murder in the Alps, the most energy you can buy is $6,500 for $40. Because of how fast energy depletes itself, that's just enough energy to complete like the first 3 out of so far 13 chapters. With Murder by Choice, the most energy you can buy is $4,500 for $35, which is by the way $10 more than it was before. The fact that inflation exists in microtransactions is insane. Again, Murder by Choice's chapter is 16 to 17 hours long. 4,500 energy lasts less than a fifth of that runtime. All of this is to say, if you want to play these games without worrying about energy, you have to be willing to spend in the triple digits in order to do so, which again is really embarrassing for a video game. The best way I've coped with playing with these games is to imagine I'm watching an episodic show play out and I have to wait for tomorrow in order to watch the next episode. It's not a perfect mechanism because it's always possible I can be in the middle of an emotional or a tense moment and then be interrupted by the energy system, but it works at least for me. Okay, with that out of the way, let's actually talk about the games. Let's start with Murder in the Alps. Now, for context, I've been playing hidden object games since I was a kid in the early 2010s, and one of the major trends I've seen in the genre overall is that the story tends to be pretty low-key. And what I mean is that dialogue and cutscenes are more often than not kept to a minimum, while the bulk of the actual game is effectively a glorified escape room game, where you figure out which inventory item goes where, with the supplemental hidden object scenes and puzzles. Even Nordcurrent made one of these more gameplay-focused hidden object scenes with the Curse of the Werewolves in 2013. Shout out if you recognize this. As a result, while you can definitely be interested to know where the plot goes and what happens to the characters, these game stories are honestly rarely written to make you feel emotionally connected to the characters or even try to make you laugh, cry, or care about the stories. For most of my life, hidden object game stories have more often than not been an excuse for the puzzle adventure gameplay to happen over actually being emotionally resonating. So, imagine my surprise back in late 2018 when I discovered Murder in the Alps from an ad and discovered how much the story was emphasized in this gorgeous looking hidden object game. Murder in the Alps is almost like a visual novel where there's pretty much no restraint on the amount of dialogue and cutscenes. What that means is that unlike most hidden object games, Murder in the Alps story has a much larger spotlight on it, for better and worse. What's better is that you don't spend a good majority of the game wandering around through the locations figuring out which item in your inventory goes where. You instead spend more time on actual relevant tasks that 100% make sense in the context of the story playing out. And because Murder in the Alps is so story focused with the occasional hidden object scene and puzzle here and there, the game's stories have more time to actually be fleshed out and have more details than they normally do in many other hidden object games. What's worse is that, quite frankly, this game has zero difficulty. Unless you're struggling on a hard puzzle or figuring out where the hidden collectibles in the locations are, it's physically impossible to remotely struggle with any part of the game because you always have one specific task you know you're supposed to do. Unlike many other hidden object games where you have the initiative to figure out where to go and what to do next, Murder in the Alps always tells you the one task you have to do and where to go and what to do next. It is extremely straightforward and linear, especially with the simple point and click navigation, or should I say tap and go navigation. In another genre, I might be bothered by how much the game lacks challenge or much player control. In this gameplay and also Murder by Choice, I am somewhat biased for them because they're hidden object games which I tend to favor, and the hidden object genre has never had this large of a focus on story compared to gameplay, so I do personally give the less interactive gameplay a pass. If you're also willing to chill with an almost visual novel type of mobile game that pretty much plays itself, you probably won't mind it too. Where the lack of player initiative becomes most problematic to me is whenever the protagonist Anna solves a mystery. In Murder in the Alps, Anna does all the thinking for the player and almost always gives an exposition dump at the end of each chapter explaining the chapter's mystery. In more popular detective games like the Ace Attorney series, there's usually a gameplay feature that takes the player step by step through the current mystery and forces them to actually think and solve it themselves based on the given evidence. That way, the player is actually on the same page as the mystery itself and gets what logic it's following. By not having this feature and having Anna explain the mystery to everyone else like Scooby-Doo, it can honestly feel like a complete ass-pull for some people, including me. Sometimes I get Anna's line of reasoning and how she puts together all the clues I've seen as the player to solve the mystery. Other times, I have no idea how Anna comes to her conclusions because I just feel like she's making shit up. All of this can be solved by just having the player do some gameplay where they actually work towards solving the mystery like Anna. I doubt this would be implemented like 13 chapters in, but it's a happy thought. On to the actual story itself. The game is currently divided into Part 1, Part 2, and Part 3, each taking place at different locations. Part 1 is in the Alps, Part 2 is in Italy, and Part 3 is in Anna's hometown, Zurich. Each part is divided into separate chapters for separate mysteries in their part's location, and the first chapter for each part is usually the bigger, ambitious story compared to the rest of the chapters. And out of all the parts, Part 3 is by far the best in terms of story quality. If I had to tier the game's parts, Part 3 would currently be at A tier, while Parts 1 and 2 would be down at C and D tiers. If it wasn't for how good Part 3 is, I wouldn't have even bothered and be interested in the game enough to make this video right now. Before Part 3, I had a decent time with the game, sure, but when it came to beating the latest chapter and waiting for the next one, I just straight up uninstalled the game, stopped thinking about the game, only remembered it until several months later, check if a new chapter came out, reinstalled the game to play it, and then rinse and replay. This cycled for every new chapter for Part 1 and Part 2. Then, The Data Killer, the first chapter for Part 3, came out. I only played the chapter 3 months after it came out because again, I mostly forgotten about the game and only just remembered it until then. And when I finally did, I was completely blown away by the chapter. From the first couple of minutes all the way up to the chapter's ending, I knew I was playing something special. For the first time in the whole game, I actually cared and valued many of the characters of the story, including Anna herself, who I honestly haven't cared that much up to that point. I was actually really hooked to the chapter's plot and felt actual emotions I never thought I'd feel when playing a mobile hidden object game. By the end of the chapter, I kept the game installed on my phone and actually actively thought about the game and looked forward to the next chapters. This is in large contrast to parts 1 and 2, as they're frankly are nowhere near as good. Okay, let's get part 1 out of the way. Obviously, it was fine enough that enough players, which included me, kept playing the game and showed to Nordcurrent people wanted to see more stories of this game. And while the game now, let's just get most of part 1 and even all of part 2 to jump straight to part 3. Even I personally recommend still playing the both parts in order to get all the story context and get used to the gameplay. But having played and loved part 3, part 1 just honestly looks a lot worse and generic in comparison. I generally don't know what drove 2018 me to keep playing part 1, at the time just the first 3 chapters, because in hindsight, it's ridiculously uninteresting and plain. It's odd for me to describe, but I never cared for any of the characters in part 1, even Anna herself. Most dialogue in part 1 is focused on progressing the plot, with the tiniest fragments of actually showing their personalities and likability. The first chapter, Deadly Snowstorm, is especially guilty of having one-note characters. The chapter follows the predictable murder mystery formula, where a large group of people are gathered in an isolated area and people get slowly killed off by the murderer, and with the fact that the story never makes any significant effort characterizing each person besides what they do for a living. I didn't feel much whenever one of these characters got killed off. One particularly awful aspect of Deadly Snowstorm is Anna's ending exposition dump explaining the mystery. Remember how I mentioned it sometimes feel like Anna makes stuff up whenever explaining the mystery? This is the worst case of that, because Anna is able to come to conclusions based on details that are never established to the player. It really feels like an ass-pull when Anna has in-universe knowledge about the characters that's never shared to the player until the exposition dump. The rest of part 1 has less ass-pull exposition dumps, but it still suffers from uninteresting plots and characters. The Phantom is unsatisfyingly short, where the characters just never catch the culprit. The Atlantic connection is pretty predictable with only one new character that could possibly be the culprit, and Dancing with the Beast, which was added after all the chapters for part 2 were done, feels like complete filler and can be entirely skipped without missing anything. I really can't find anything redeemable or noteworthy about part 1's story to talk about, especially compared to the other parts. I appreciate part 1 for being the writer's first steps with this game before deciding to write better stories, but otherwise, I really don't care for it. Part 2 is where the quality of the story goes from worse than mid to slightly above mid. It's not anything I feel that passionate for, but even teenage me recognized the writers were actually trying a bit harder with part 2. For starters, the recurring characters are actually kind of interesting. The relationships between Officer Kotze, the old grumpy guy, Officer Luigi, the submissive sweetheart, and Anna, the one actively pushing for an investigation even if no one believes her, is a particularly fun highlight of all chapters of part 2. The mystery themselves are also a bit more engaging in part 2. In part 1, literally every culprit's motivation is that they work for the Nazis, and that's about it. In part 2, the culprit's motivations are actually written to be more personal, and therefore have more emotional weight to them. And because the culprits are more nuanced than before, the plots themselves are a tad more riveting to experience. Again, they didn't make me care enough to get like teary-eyed from an emotional moment, or be that thrilled from an intense moment, but the fact that these moments are actually here in the first place is still appreciated. Part 2 also probably has the prettiest looking environment out of all the parts, probably because it's the most survivable one to be in. All the environments are actually pretty immersive, thanks to the great looking 2D graphics and art style, which is honestly expected for most modern hidden object games, but it's definitely still impressive in this game. The first chapter, The Air, was my favorite chapter of Murder in the Alps before The Data Killer, because it does the usual murder mystery trick better than Deadly Snowstorm. Back in 2018, when I was just playing the game for the sake of playing it, it wasn't part 1 that kept me hooked into waiting for the next chapters of the game to release. It was the Air, the only part 2 chapter release at the time, that kept me intrigued enough to keep the game at the back of my head. While the Air still suffers from all the problems I mentioned before, with some characters not having much time to be interesting, and Anna bringing up details the player never finds in-game, it still has plenty of substance to chew on. It blew my mind back then, it still blows my mind now, that the developers initially started with having the game be about murders in the snowy Alps, and then just decided to stop taking place in the Alps and go to a completely new location. And thank God they did, because the story greatly benefits from having an actually completely new location to explore in once in a while. The rest of Part 2's chapters are shorter than the Air as I referenced before, but it's still not mediocre experiences like Part 1. Again, the writers were actually making a solid effort in adding a layer of emotion to Part 2's chapters. It's nothing to be very wowed by, but it's nothing to be that bored by either. They all still end with Anna giving an exposition dump explaining the mystery, which isn't very impressive, but it is what it is. All of this is to say, all of Part 2 gets completely washed away by Part 3's Data Killer chapter, because again, the chapter is a massive improvement on every front. This chapter took the longest with 1 whole year of development, which probably doesn't sound like a long time to you if you're remotely familiar with video games, except it did to the 57 Murder in the Alps fans for some reason. Either way, it shows they put a lot of actual effort and care through having more time to make this chapter. Out of every chapter in the game, the Data Killer has the longest runtime with at least 5 hours as I mentioned, and boy does the chapter accomplish a lot in that time. The biggest improvement story-wise is giving Anna a complete glow-up in this chapter. In the previous parts, you only really see the investigative side of Anna in being determined to solve a mystery or being stern with authority figures and suspects, which you could describe any assertive detective protagonist. In Part 3, you get to see Anna at where she lives and works in Zurich, and consequently you get to see her more human and vulnerable sides, especially when interacting with people like coworkers she's quite familiar with. For example, what makes Anna keep doing her job? What pisses Anna off the most? How is her working relationships with her colleagues? What does Anna do when she needs to apologize to someone? What sense of humor does Anna have? How does Anna react to getting beeped at during traffic? All of these questions are answered in just the Data Killer, and it does wonders in making Anna way more likable and relatable. Hidden object protagonists are usually an outsider to the stories they're involved in, and have most of their thoughts and voice be relegated into sound and black box that's easily ignorable. Here, Anna has an actual personal investment in the case she solves because it takes place in her hometown, and especially more likable thanks to her really good voice actress that actively speaks and expresses herself to the other characters. Added with the fact that Anna's expressions during the comic cutscenes can be really funny, I unironically think Anna might be the best hidden object game protagonist. Speaking of the comic cutscenes, which are already ingenious on their own in saving costs, I do think Part 3's comic art style is the best out of all the parts. Do the comic cutscenes look significantly low budget than that of Parts 1 and 2 at times? Sure. Do the animations in Part 3 cutscenes look uncanny and goofy more times than in the other parts? Sure. But what I think triumphs most is the high amount of expression characters are given. The characters make a lot of different and enjoyable facial expressions that add to their personalities and thus make them more memorable than they otherwise would be. Because the comic cutscenes are a lot more energetic and lively, I had a lot more fun with them in Part 3 than that of the other parts. Another small but significant improvement they made in the Data Killer is both the soundtrack and voice acting. Both aspects have always been solid but not too remarkable most of the time in previous parts. Starting with the Data Killer though, they both ascend to a completely different level. With the soundtrack, Part 3's tension tracks are especially considerably better at doing their job than that of Parts 1 and 2, and add so much more weight to the tense moments of the Data Killer. It's a lot more scarier. With the voice acting, everyone does a greater job at making their characters more iconic, again Anna especially. During the chapter's more tense moments, the voice acting gets so good it gave me massive chills. Again, I never thought I'd feel this way towards a mobile hidden object game. Back to the actual writing, there's more characters Anna meets and interacts with throughout the whole chapter that have actual personalities and personal tics that make them deeper and more interesting. For starters, Lieutenant Yuta is a character I didn't think I was going to like much when starting the chapter, but she honestly grew on me the more I watched Yuta and Anna's relationship grow throughout the chapter. Also, is it just me, or does Anna and Yuri have way more tension with each other than Anna and Luigi ever did? Anyways, the plot of the Data Killer is again on another level, and it making me be genuinely really invested in what happens next. Out of all the chapters, the Data Killer feels the most like an emotional roller coaster because I legitimately could not predict what happens next, and actually felt nervous progressing the story. By the time I got a notification that Part 3's second chapter, Ladies of the Night, came out, I still remember that I unironically froze out of pure fear of what the writers would pull off next. That's how much the Data Killer left a mark on me. Ignoring the energy system, the Data Killer might unironically be my top favorite hidden object game ever, just for how much of a lasting impression it left on me. It's honestly a testament that I was still able to be blown away by the chapter, even while being constantly interrupted by the energy system, though I might be biased because I miraculously ran out of energy only during convenient times. I was even willing to do something for the first time that I otherwise would have done, pay for a free-to-play motor game. Specifically on this honestly not bad sale, which I jumped on to exist long after I beat the Data Killer, just because I respected the high standards of writing they had by the chapter. It still doesn't justify the energy system, absolutely not, but it still is something to know. So yeah, I really like the Data Killer, and if in an alternate universe where it was like a separate game purchasable on Steam or something, I would 100% recommend it. The rest of the chapters of Part 3 don't really reach the same level of intensity as the Data Killer, but they're still significantly better than the other parts with generally more interesting characters. The biggest flaw I have with these characters after the Data Killer is how short they are. Again, I know that's always been the case with the other non-first chapters of the other parts, but because of how long and spectacular the Data Killer was, I wanted more of the same quality and at least similar runtime in the next chapters, and I did not get that. The plots of most chapters after the Data Killer does feel a bit tame and underwhelming compared to the Data Killer, which is a shame because I do like a lot of the characters that show up in these chapters, but they don't have nearly as much screen time as the characters do in the Data Killer. For example, a character like Carolyn has potential of being a young fangirl for Anna and being friends with a pickpocketer like Manu. She's only appeared in like 2 post-Data Killer chapters so far, and yet she has less than 5 whole minutes of screen time. Compare that to Uli, who was given way more time to shine throughout just the Data Killer. I also give credit where it's due. Even though Anna still does the Scooby-Doo explanation of the mystery at the end of some chapters, it's clearer what mental steps she takes in order to solve the mysteries in Part 3, unlike the other parts where Anna pulls details out of her ass. I honestly don't mind that Part 3 is getting way more chapters than the other parts. If they're still making new chapters for Part 3 after the 6th one, I will start to get concerned that Zurich overstayed its welcome, but as it stands, I appreciate getting more content for my already favorite part. Of course, the part's not without major flaws, which I'll get to now. Ladies of the Night has one of the most misleading opening cutscenes I've ever seen from a video game. I honestly recommend closing your eyes when the opening cutscene is playing, because what's depicted in that cutscene just blatantly never gets brought up again in the actual chapter. I was a bit let down by the chapter and how it followed up from the Data Killer, because the main murder mystery as a whole kind of serves no point and could be removed almost entirely without much impact. Grey Nature similarly has a mystery that feels like filler. Don't get me wrong, Ladies of the Night and Grey Nature undeniably have great moments that flesh out the characters more and make me care about them more, but their main plots feel quite lackluster compared to the Data Killer. The plot of Forgotten Memento is where Part 3 starts reaching back to the same peak as the Data Killer. It's because of this chapter specifically that I don't only call out the Data Killer for being this game's peak, and instead call out the entire Part 3 for that. Once again, I had no idea where Forgotten Memento's story was going to take me, and was both terrified and excited to see what would come next. Unfortunately, Forgotten Memento is nowhere near as long as the Data Killer, and ends on a sudden cliffhanger. A cliffhanger that is infamously never resolved by the next chapter no quarter, which makes the baffling decision of never bringing up the events of Forgotten Memento at all, and taking place 2 whole years later. That gets into a dating controversy that would derail this video, but it's genuinely confusing to me how they thought it would be a good idea to follow up a bombshell chapter like Forgotten Memento, explicitly ending on a cliffhanger with a filler chapter that barely addresses it. Yeah, they had different writers that make the 2 chapters at the same time, and for some reason ordered them this way, which is quite a dumb decision that should have had more oversight, but whatever. It's a shame because Nordcurrent probably has the best filler mystery in Part 3, with more character shining moments and an intriguing premise that has a bit of a more satisfying ending. You've probably noticed I've gone into more detail about what I like and what I don't like about Part 3 than any of the other parts. That's because, again, I really enjoy Part 3 above Parts 1 and Part 2 combined. And that's why, again, it really frustrates me that the only real way to play this game's Part 3 is to endure the energy system. There are other miscellaneous parts of the game I should mention. This game does take up a bit of space on your phone, especially after downloading all the chapters, which reaches above 3 gigabytes, somehow still less than the footage I've gotten for this video. Technically, you can just uninstall and reinstall the game while making sure the game's progress is saved, of course, to reduce the game size as I've done. But I've seen other mobile games that give you the option to, or automatically delete downloaded episodic content once you finish with them, so there's no reason why Murder in the Alps doesn't take this into consideration. Again, not a big issue since you could just uninstall and reinstall Murder in the Alps, but it's still weird. Murder in the Alps also hosts daily challenges and traveling carnivals where you do hidden object scenes competing with other people to get more energy. Please never participate in them, as from personal experience, the energy reward you get after grinding at both events is always less than the energy you spend in total to play them. There's also a homemaker mode where you use in-game currencies to customize this random house. I know this insult gets overused a lot online, but I think it's fair to say that literally no one asks for this, especially in a game about solving murder mysteries. It's pretty obvious the only reason Nordcurrent even included this mode in the game is to replace the energy rewards from doing an achievement and finding a hidden collectible with the in-game currencies used in this home makeover mode. And if you don't care about this mode at all, which I suspect is most people, these in-game currencies are completely worthless, and now you've missed out on the removed energy rewards. There's this one singular plant you can water and wait for 3 hours to get energy from, and if you wait too long, you won't get any energy. This was not worth removing the energy rewards from the achievements and collectibles at all. Oh, and also, now every time you complete a hidden object scene in the chapters, there's a whole ass animation of Dana clapping and giving you these useless in-game currencies before showing you what item you got. I really vastly prefer the previous symbol pop-ups that just show you what item you got and move along. This can be pretty immersion breaking, especially if you're at like a blood-filled crime scene and you get an animation from completing a hidden object scene that reminds you you're playing a mobile game. This is kind of an odd note to leave this rambling review of Murder in the Alps on, but it's not really any more optimal place I could mention any of this, so there you go. Considering the game as a whole, it would probably go at B- tier. When considering the energy system, the game honestly goes down at C or even D tier if you don't have much patience with the system, which I 100% don't blame you for. Now, let's talk about the other game I'll express my love and hate for. From the hype of having played the Data Killer and wanting the same quality writing from Nordcurrent, I speculated on a lot of ideas on what Nordcurrent could do next. One of them was, what if Nordcurrent made an entirely separate game that was just a modern day version of Murder in the Alps. At the time, I really thought Nordcurrent would never actually do this because to me, that was just a fanfic pipe dream I only had to myself. Turns out I wasn't the only person thinking of that. Murder by Choice, released in 2022, is exactly the same in gameplay. Like, exactly the same. Murder by Choice does have a completely repolished visual look from Murder in the Alps with the art style and UI, but it is upfront at otherwise being the exact same as Murder in the Alps, but in the present day. The plus side of this is that already dedicated fans of Murder in the Alps like me are pretty much guaranteed to play and enjoy Murder by Choice because, you know, it's the same game. The downside of this is that every flaw of Murder in the Alps translates to Murder by Choice, including the energy system. I've seen people who aren't familiar with Nordcurrent shenanigans that played this game and absolutely tore into it because of the energy system. As one in 170 people who actually played up to the ending of Chapter 1 and 1 in 56 people who actually enjoyed playing the game up to that point, I'm simultaneously heartbroken to read negative reviews on this game, and I'm completely unsurprised by them. I think by far the biggest flaw with Murder by Choice's current chapter, Chapter 1, that makes the energy system even more painful, is just the sheer length of it. As I said before, Chapter 1, which I will emphasize this one murder mystery in this one location, is 16 to 17 hours long. And to remind you, with the energy system and not paying a penny on this game, it took me more than 4 whole months to beat the game. I was a high schooler with more free time back then. No wonder people who presumably actually have more stuff to do despise this game. It just keeps going on and on and on and honestly gets to the point where you just have to wonder, When is the story actually going to end? Compared to Murder in the Alps, that game does occasionally have a bit of padding out where Anna does other people's errands and just does unrelated tasks, but it never gets as bad as Murder by Choice and being stretched out to being longer than the average novel doubled. There are plenty of pointless moments throughout Chapter 1 that can be cut out entirely without losing any value. Particularly, the protagonist, Kara Page, gets picked on so many times to do other people's chores that don't progress the mystery at all. I can give like the first couple of hours a pass because Kara is an outsider to everyone else and so needs to build rapport and all that in order to actually talk with them. But by the halfway point, there's no longer any reason for the errands to be in the game at all other than make it even longer. There are also not a small amount of moments where Kara deliberately keeps important information to herself for no obvious reason. The most excruciating case of this is when Kara finds a handwritten threat note from the culprit about 3 hours into the game, and instead of trying to verify whose handwriting it belongs to, she never brings it up to anyone else until more than 10 hours later in order to cross-reference between the note and one of the suspect's own handwriting. The worst part is that verifying the note's handwriting is the gotcha moment for revealing the culprit. This note has been in Kara's page for more than 10 hours, and she never once mentions it to anyone else or even thinks of investigating the note further, and yet that's the exact evidence she needs to get the culprit. The point in the game for me that made even a fan like me just want the game to get to the ending already was when a chimpanzee just suddenly dropped from a fence, stole a book from a fully grown woman, successfully ran away from 2 fully grown adults, and now I have to spend the next 10 minutes doing a hidden object scene and a puzzle trying to get the damn book back. This happens 13 hours into the game. Even after the culprit gets revealed, it takes another goddamn hour and so in order to actually reach the end of the chapter. And even still, the very last thing you do in Chapter 1 is to do yet another errand for someone else, even though there are multiple people around who can do the chore for you. The writers even named the tasks always helpful. They knew what they were doing. It's very clear the writers were trying to, or at least were directed by executives, to make the game as long as humanly possible in order to make the energy system interrupt more and encourage the players to pay up for the energy. The chapter's sheer length would have been an achievement if it was actually productively spent. It is instead a testament of how padding out can ruin a story for a lot of people. Another aspect of the game it doesn't handle well is the choices system. In every single promotion of the game, it's always mentioned how the player can make in-game choices that, and I quote, shape how the story unfolds. The game tutorial tells you that your choices matter. This game even won a gaming award for allowing the players to make choices that results in, and I again quote, different paths and endings, making each playthrough a unique experience and encourages replayability. First of all, being able to replay the game is a complete lie. This isn't Murder in the Alps where the chapters are shown and you can replay them again, albeit not freely. You don't even get that option to replay Chapter 1 at all in this game. Second of all, 99% of your choices in-game are horribly worthless. I am not exaggerating that if you got rid of this game's choices system, the vast majority of the chapter story stays exactly the same. You know that one ProCD video that made fun of games where your choices change the dialogue ever so slightly and nothing else? This is one of those games. For example, sometimes you can choose who gets to accompany you for help on a certain task. The dialogue suddenly mildly changes based on who you choose, but the end result is always exactly the same because everyone is apparently equally competent. Other times, you can piss one character off with one choice, or don't piss that character off with the other choice. Again, a couple voice lines do change based on if you piss off that character or not, but once those few minutes of changed dialogue pass, Carla's dialogue and relationship with that character stays exactly the same. There's plenty of choices that at first seem like they might actually change the plot, only for whatever choice you make to get completely negated, often almost instantly. One time there's a point where you have to either side with the Admiral to get rid of a thing, or side with Ruben to keep that thing. If you side with the Admiral, he eats the thing out to the sea because we voted for him, sure. But if you side with Ruben, the Admiral just takes the thing for himself and eats it out to the sea anyways. What was the point of letting you make a choice here if it wasn't going to matter at all? That's a question you'll ask multiple times throughout the game. Don't get me wrong, it was still kind of entertaining to me to see how the characters slightly say different things based on what choice you make. And there is sometimes a bit of tension when you're faced with a difficult choice, especially between two characters. It's completely fake tension, but it's still kind of thrilling in the moment nonetheless. If it wasn't for the fact that the game's marketing leaned into how impactful the choices system is so much, I wouldn't care about the choices that much. And if it especially wasn't for the fact that every single choice you make costs energy, meaning you can be interrupted by the energy system midway through dialogue, I would nowhere be as hard on the energy system as I am now. Now, I did put in the video's title that I still love Murder by Choice, and I have talked in extensive detail of why I can't recommend it, so let's actually get to that part. The biggest accomplishment this game does to me is make me actually individually care about every character in the chapter. Obviously there's bigger winners than others, but it's pretty rare for me to look at every main character in a piece of media and confidently both remember all of their names and personalities and actually genuinely hold some level of investment in seeing them again after this. That is one plus to chapter 1 having such a long runtime. I still think the chapter can be significantly shortened, definitely, but I do appreciate how the game actually takes its time in giving enough runtime to each of the suspects and giving them decent personalities to connect to. It even actually takes the time for Carla to say goodbye to each suspect at the end of the chapter and have the ending cutscene be a "where are they now" epilogue for the suspect, which I definitely appreciate. These aren't like very complicated nor deep characters, don't get me wrong, but I'm so used to getting one-note characters in hidden object games that it's a genuine miracle that I care about chapter 1's characters that much. One small but essential aspect of the game that I think helped make the characters memorable is the dialogue's UI. For example, I really like the larger emphasis put on the characters' names. It's minor, but it really helps actually putting a name to a face and thus making the characters more memorable to me. Also, unlike Murder in the Alps, Murder by Choice doesn't have the characters lip sync to the voice lines. Murder by Choice honestly cleverly gets around this by directing the player's attention to the bottom of the screen where the characters show different expressions. Even though each character only has like 6 total expressions, they really help adding a lot of charm and actual humanity to the characters. And of course, there's the fact that the characters themselves are decently written. Again, they're not massively written, and they all sometimes act dumb in order to make the plot longer, but they're still written to actually be, compelling. These characters feel human to me, and at least to me, that is remarkable for a mobile hidden object game. Another large part of why I actually like the characters is the voice acting. Now, a consistent criticism of this game that I've seen is that the voice acting is terrible. I really think this is overblown. Like, come on, they are not at high school dropouts level. That is just straight up exaggerated, not to say the least disrespectful. That being said, I would be lying if the game's voice acting wasn't weird at times. Not that bad or silly, just sometimes really phoned in or just off. Hey, this is future me here. I originally intended to make and show a compilation of some of the weaker voice line deliveries, but the more I worked on it, the more I realized how nitpicky it was. Like, I still believe there's still those weaker moments, don't get me wrong, but I feel like it's disingenuous for me to compile clips of the voice acting barely sounding horrible at even their worst moments. In fact, here's past me giving praise to the voice acting because it actually deserves it. I actually still think the voice actors were about perfectly casted to play the characters. If it wasn't for how the voice actors delivered their lines for the more solid moments, I don't think I cared for the characters as much as I would have even with the other compliments I gave. For example, I'm naming just a few so I am spoiling every character. The Admiral's voice actor does a great job at maintaining a commanding, belligerent tone that fits the character well. Freddy's voice actor also does a great job at giving the character an arrogant yet somehow still charismatic voice to this bimbo jock. Portia's voice actress is really great at making her sound like the frosty queen that she is. And Carla's voice actress generally hits the nail at giving Carla a youthful, confident energy that still makes me root for her by the end of the chapter. With all of these ingredients combined to make characters I care about, I just actually also care about the chapter's plot more, even if it self-cements me from excessive padding out as I mentioned. There are emotional moments in chapter 1 that got me to shake, sweat, even teary-eyed at times. I don't know if other people, even people who like this game, reacted that much like me when playing this chapter. Again, I know some people just don't give a shit, and honestly I don't blame them, but this game still has a special place in my heart just for being able to break me that much, almost right up there with the Data Killer. I was so invested in what's going to happen next that I didn't even realize that the chapter is straight up better than the Snowstorm. Like, besides the identical premise of being trapped in an isolated place with a murderer, some of the key plot points of chapter 1 exactly mirror that of Deadly Snowstorm. They are too similar that even certain spoilers are the same, so I can't reveal what they are, but just trust me here. But again, I honestly didn't notice the similarities when playing the game, so it's not a big deal, just as long as you don't notice the spoilery parallels between Deadly Snowstorm and Chapter 1. Another compliment I'd like to give to Murder by Choice is that this game looks and sounds really gorgeous, probably even more so than Murder in the Alps. Visually, it's hard and in a good way to tell at times that all you're basically looking at is a bunch of PNG files being fully animated. And audibly, the sound design is excellent with all the immersive ambience and sound effects. I don't know how to describe this art style, but I really love how perfectly it mixes between realistic and cartoony, somehow creating the vibes of a more modern time compared to the definitely 20th century vibes of Murder in the Alps environments. The characters themselves look great with distinct designs and outfit colors. They even move like surprisingly realistically. There was a time when I just paused playing the game and just stared at the animations of the characters slowly breathing in and out. It's really good. The comic cutscenes also look pretty good most of the time. I do like how faithful the art style of the comic cutscenes are to the art style of everything else in game, unlike Murder in the Alps. That being said, in hindsight, and I don't know why, the first third of the game has significantly less polished comic artwork than the rest of the game. It's mostly not that bad, but it is noticeably worse than how it is in the later hours. Now, as I said before, there's no option to replay Chapter 1 at all, unlike the chapters of Murder in the Alps, which is just stupid. Nordcurrent, it's free money. Your energy system would still be active during people's replays. So instead of being able to replay Chapter 1, you're stuck on this island until Chapter 2 releases, and given that it's currently been almost 2 years since Chapter 1, I suspect Chapter 2 would just be as biblically long as Chapter 1, which, oh boy. While waiting for Chapter 2, Nordcurrent does give you two things to do while stuck in limbo. The first is exploration mode. It allows you to collect the main collectibles you missed during Chapter 1, which is actually really nice, and I love to have learned this was a thing before I spent half an hour tapping through the locations to find all the collectibles before the chapter ends. It also allows you to get extra collectibles scattered throughout the island, which gives you a decent amount of extra energy that is definitely just going to last an hour in Chapter 2. I'm going to be honest, I did not have the patience to find these collectibles without a walkthrough, and so did many other people. I do like the idea of being able to navigate through the island's individual areas just for fun. I don't like being constantly reminded that Chapter 2 is coming out every time I enter a new location. I also kind of wish they gave the option to play the hidden object scenes and puzzles by going to the locations and just allowing the players to do them again. A 2011 Wii hidden object game did this with just the hidden object scenes. I'm pretty sure this is implementable into 2022 mobile game. It will probably cost energy because, of course it would, but it will give literally anything to do in the locations after exploration mode is done, anything outside of the memories mode, which, yeah, let's talk about right now. Memories is a game mode of Murder by Choice that was actually recently added early this year. On paper, having 5 separate mini-stories focusing specifically on a character from Chapter 1 and reviewing their lore sounds really good. Obviously, you wouldn't unlock these stories right away because this is a mobile game. You have to do a couple of hidden object scenes in order to unlock enough shards in order to then unlock each act of these stories. Okay, sure. I'm used to grinding of hidden object scenes in order to unlock a thing that would then let me progress through a story. That's literally every other mobile exclusive hidden object game. In practice, yeah, just refer to the second half of this video's title. You know how I said you needed to do a couple of hidden object scenes in order to unlock the stories? I was slightly understanding that. You need to do hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hidden object scenes in order to get just enough shards to unlock all the stories. And as you guessed it, every single hidden object scene costs energy. Here's how the memories mode works. Every time you need to do a hidden object scene in this area called the memory map, you have to spend either a free daily ticket or 60 energy. Every time you complete a hidden object scene, you get 5 shards and 100 XP. The XP is to increase your level. Every time you level up, you get 100 shards. In order to unlock all acts of all the stories, you need a whopping 10,200 shards total. At first, it takes like 200 XP to level up. Then it takes 300 XP, then 500, then 1,000, then 1,500, and finally 2,000 XP. Out of curiosity, I did the math. If you really want to be a completely free-to-play player, it would take so long that assuming you play at least 4 hidden object scenes every day, using the daily ticket and energy since Memories released mid-February this year, it would take until late September in order to get enough shots to play all of the stories. It would take more than 7 months straight playing this game every single day like Duolingo in order to be able to access all of Memory story content. This still shortened by like a few months at best if you're someone who unlocked the memories mode like midway through chapter 1 and get to use the daily ticket in order to do the hidden object scenes, not the energy, because you still need to beat chapter 1. But even still, months of daily grinding with hidden object scenes in order to access every act of every story available. If you're not paying, even I was not willing to make this commitment. I have other shit to get done. You know how I said spending $10 on that deal in Murder the Alps was like my first time spending money on a free-to-play mobile game? Because of memories, Murder by Choice became my second time doing so, where I spent a teeny tiny amount of $185. To be clear, I am not aware. Never in my life have I ever wanted to spend more than $100 on a free-to-play mobile game, but I really needed to get memories done before March was over. I did not and still don't want to still be playing Murder by Choice right now in August. First of all, please do not buy the shards directly. The most you can buy is 300 shards for $21. And again, you need 10,200 shards in total in order to unlock every act. So in total, you will have to pay for 30 shards 34 times, costing $714. Again, please don't do this. I was desperate, but I was not that desperate, so I knew I had to grind with the memory map hidden object scenes. I didn't bother counting the exact amount of energy I spent for in total, but I do remember that I spent for the largest amount of energy possible 3 times, which was $25 at the time, and spent about 10 times for the occasional sales that popped up every now and then. So in total, I had like at least 20,000 energy and saved about $500. With the energy and across multiple weeks, I grinded with the hidden object scenes until I eventually got the needed 10,200 shards, which was midway through level 64. According to my phone's recorded usage time, I spent over 20 hours just doing hidden object scenes over and over until I could finally spend the rest of the hours playing and replaying and recording and re-recording the story's content to upload on YouTube so that no one else has to bear my pain. At least 3 other people still upload playthroughs of their memory stories, so I didn't even succeed in that regard, but I do like to think I saved not a small amount of people's time and money, because this is genuinely awful. Yes, there are randomized modifiers that switch up the hidden object gameplay and eventually slightly different areas on the map to do the hidden object scenes on, which makes it more endurable and interesting. But that really doesn't change the fact that I shouldn't be doing more than 20 hours of hidden object scenes in order to access all the story content. Do you know how much content you even get with the 5 unlocked stories? Under 4 hours total. I spend hours and hours, days and days, weeks and weeks playing hidden object scenes on my bed and chair, and all I get is less than 4 hours of story content. Now, are the 5 memory stories actually good? As I said before, each story focuses on a character from chapter 1. They're split up into 3 acts, except for the culprit story, which is split up into 5 acts. When you play the game, it's exactly similar to the gameplay of chapter 1, this time without the energy system at all, and without any cost to replay the stories. It feels absolutely amazing and liberating to be able to play a part of a Nordcurrent mobile game without worrying about losing energy playing and replaying it. It sucks that you have to endure hell in order to reach that part, and that this is probably the most generous Nordcurrent will ever be, but I'll take what I can get. The main difference between how the plot plays out in chapter 1 and how the plot plays out in the stories of Memories is that unlike chapter 1, Memories has almost zero padding out and can legitimately be called a visual novel with the amount of pure dialogue it has. The vast majority of Memories is just dialogue between the focused character and another character in one location. There's a few extremely basic tags and very little traversing, with pretty much 0 hidden object scenes and puzzles here. There's just 2 hidden object scenes in Act 1 of the culprit story, and just 1 puzzle in Act 1 of Mrs. Bird's story. That's it. I'm not sure how people feel about this basically dialogue only structure of the memory stories because, well, most people haven't actually gotten to the stories yet. This heavy focus on dialogue probably comes from the fact that you have to do over 20 hours of pure gameplay in order to reach the story, therefore it makes sense for the story to not have any actual gameplay. That being said, again, the runtime of the stories is like less than a fourth of the runtime of the grinding you have to do to reach them. I would have liked to see more substance to the stories, not only to make them more worth it after the endless hidden object scenes, but to make them feel more engaging since this is, a video game. There are plenty of moments where characters just instantly grab an item they need, which could have been replaced by the characters having to do a hidden object scene in order to then get the item for more challenge for the player. I actually wouldn't have minded playing hidden object scenes then, because I'd actually have fun doing them without worrying about being interrupted by the energy system. There's pretty few moments where the puzzle could be implemented because of how dialogue focused the stories are written to be, But again, I still do think it is a detriment that the memory stories don't have much substance outside of the dialogue. The actual plots of the memory stories are pretty straightforward. They're mostly just an excuse for the characters to yap to each other in order to reveal new lore. It is very expositional. Obviously, most media has to verbally explain a lot in order for the audience to actually get what a character's backstory is. But a lot of the memory stories are basically just a character sharing their backstories with another character for several minutes straight. Q, Mrs. Bird, and Portia all talk about their backstories to Ruben in the stories, much more extensively with Q and Mrs. Bird's case. Margot talks about her backstory to Jax and Jax's stories, and yes, it is weird that I feel like I've learned more about Margot in this story than Jax himself. And lastly, Spoiler character talks about their backstory in the Culprit story, and the Culprit themselves dumps their entire backstory onto Spoiler character in the same story. I'm a bit ambivalent about this. On the one hand, I do enjoy learning more about the characters I already like, and learning more about the characters is the whole point of memories. On the one hand, I don't think it's best writing for the audience to learn more about the characters only through having them explain it to another person every single time. This would turn the audience off in pretty much every form of media, especially a video game. Beyond just brief flashbacks and cutscenes, I feel like actually witnessing or having actual gameplay of the character's backstory would have been more immersive and fun than just listening to the characters verbally explain it all to us. That way, it's not just several minutes of a character explaining their background to another character, there's actual gameplay to back up that background. If you don't care for the characters that much, you're probably not going to care for the memory stories either. But as someone who does care for the characters, I actually quite like the memory stories a bit. Again, nothing groundbreaking, and I do have to mentally separate the stories from the grinding I had to do for them so that I better enjoy the stories, but still legitimately not a bad time nonetheless. As I said before, I like learning more about the characters I already like. I also like hearing more from all the characters' voice actors again, who continue to do a pretty good job here. Your choices still don't matter, and why would it? These stories take place before or concurrently with Chapter 1. But because you can replay these stories completely free, I actually had quite a bit of fun seeing how the dialogue and even sometimes the cutscenes change based on your choice, so that was nice. I also quite like the Culprit story for explaining plot points left unaddressed in Chapter 1. I feel like they should have been explained in the actual main chapter, but at least they add a lot more value to the Culprit story and make it more special compared to the other stories. That being said, Act 5 of the Culprit story is completely unnecessary. Not only does it depict many things already thoroughly explained in Chapter 1, but it does not relate to the story arc seen in the first 4 acts of the Culprit story. All it does is have a way too expensive entry fee of 1,300 shots that does not match the importance of the act at all. Is that it for memories? I think that's it without spoiling more. Let's wrap this up. So without considering the energy system and the memory map, Murder by Choice is a B tier game for me. Back to that alternate universe where Murder by Choice was on Steam without the 2, I think it would have been more celebrated by hidden object nerds like me for the great characters, visuals, and emotional moments. Sadly, again, I don't live in that world, so when considering the energy system and memory map, it's going down 2 full tiers for reminding people why hidden object games aren't mainstream in the slightest. As I said before, that just breaks my heart. Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice, despite all the flaws I mentioned, still remain among my top favorite hidden object games and honestly top video games that I've played, period. I'm a bit biased because I like hidden object games more than a lot of other people and probably should actually branch out a bit more, but I still hold this opinion. When I first saw that ad for Murder in the Alps back in 2018, I did not think that would lead me here making this video dedicated to both loving and hating on Murder in the Alps and basically its sequel 6 years later. I also did not think I would experience spoiler moments that would get me to feel as hard as I did towards these free-to-play mobile hidden object games, and I certainly did not think I would spend close to $200 and several hours of my life on these games. I do hope that these games leave an actual positive impact somehow in the end, despite their strict energy systems. Like sure, do they prove corporate capitalism has also ruined video games as an art form by regularly encouraging money-hungry practices like the energy system? Yeah, of course. But I still hope that the brilliant ideas that can be found in these games are recognized by some people and used in other media. PC hidden object games could especially learn from Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice by having stories that actually try to go above and beyond, characters who don't have one or personalities, gameplay that ties into the stories more, and graphics that stand out for the uniqueness and immersiveness without being ultra realistic. I have no idea who will be even watching this video up to this point, especially actual professional developers, but what I'm trying to say is, I want to see more of the best of Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice in other media. I crap on these games a lot because I want to be able to recommend them to other people without a major asterisk. Where Murder in the Alps and Murder by Choice one day get pre-owned versions without the energy systems and have a much better chance of having a lasting legacy beyond just YouTube playthroughs and Facebook uses? Or will they continue to have energy systems that massively turn off so many people and will almost inevitably get shut down like so many other free-to-play mobile games because they don't meet the profit quota? I hope Nordcurrent makes the right choice here, because unlike in Murder by Choice, it actually matters. Thanks for watching, everyone, if there is anyone. This was my first ever actual video where I vocally share my thoughts on a thing. I've been writing a script for this video since January, but I've had to pull it off actually finishing and polishing it, especially because of schoolwork. Even as the end of the summer approaches, I still find myself procrastinating on what I like to call my passion project because I've been actively thinking about these games for years by now. It is considerably harder than I thought, and I have a lot more respect now towards considerably better video essayists busier than I am, if you can even call this video a video essay. I actually made a note to myself that this video would be under 10 hours long, which I realized was impossible as I worked on my script more. Making your note that succinct takes a level of quality writing and video game that I'm just not at right now. So I'd say it's important for me to do this right now before I get absolutely stuffed with college work within a few weeks. I really want to try to make more of this kind of video, hopefully every month. That might age horribly, but I really do actually want to talk about plenty of equally niche stuff on the channel that, again, I've been thinking about for a while. I only have one life and I want to spend it well. On that cheery note, enjoy the rest of the day, everyone. Bye-bye. The most excruciating case of this is when Colin finds a handwritten threat note from the culprit about I'm not including that.